Number 10. Breaking focus with microchecks. You don't lose focus in dramatic ways. It doesn't shatter. It leaks. A glance at your phone, a quick tab switch, a just-checking moment that feels harmless, almost invisible. That's where fragmentation actually begins. Microchecks aren't distractions in the traditional sense. They don't pull you away from thinking. They interrupt the formation of thought itself. Just as your mind starts building momentum, connecting ideas, deepening perspective, you reset it to zero, over and over. Your brain never reaches cruising altitude. It keeps taxiing, burning fuel, never taking off. What makes microchecks dangerous is how innocent they feel. You're not choosing to stop thinking, you're choosing a tiny relief from effort, a momentary release from strain. But focus is fragile in its early stages. It needs uninterrupted time to solidify. Every microcheck teaches your brain that effort should be escaped the instant it becomes noticeable. Neurologically, you're training interruption as a reflex. The moment a thought demands patience, your mind searches for an exit, not because the thought is unimportant, but because your system has learned that relief is always one tap away. Over time, this rewires your sense of mental discomfort. Focus begins to feel wrong. Depth feels heavy. Stillness feels unsafe. And here's the quiet cost. You stop trusting your own attention. You no longer believe that staying with a thought will lead anywhere valuable. So you abandon it early, again and again. Not because you're incapable, but because you've been conditioned to quit before depth rewards you. Microchecks don't steal your time. They steal your continuity. And without continuity, no insight survives long enough to be born. Number 9. Consuming content between thoughts. You no longer finish a thought, you replace it. The moment a pause appears, waiting in line, sitting quietly, staring out a window, you reach for content. Not because you're bored, but because the gap itself feels uncomfortable. That gap used to be where reflection lived. Now, it's treated like an error state that must be patched immediately. Consuming content between thoughts is not multitasking. It's mental interference. Thoughts need silence around them to connect, stretch, and mature. When you insert content into every pause, you interrupt the brain's natural consolidation process. Ideas don't just form while you're actively thinking. They complete themselves in the spaces between thinking. Those spaces are now occupied. This constant input trains your mind to expect stimulation as a default. Instead of asking, "What do I think about this?" your brain asks, "What can I consume next?" Thinking becomes secondary. Passive intake becomes primary. You slowly lose the habit of internal dialogue because an external voice is always speaking over it. The danger isn't the content itself, it's the timing. You're feeding your brain mid-thought before ideas can stabilize. That creates mental fragmentation. Unfinished thoughts stacked on top of each other, never resolved, never integrated. Over time, this produces a vague sense of mental noise. You feel busy in your head, yet strangely empty of conclusions. This is why modern rest doesn't feel restorative. You're never actually resting your cognition. You're distracting it. Silence used to recharge the mind. Now it triggers anxiety, because silence demands engagement with unfinished thoughts you've been avoiding. When you consume content between thoughts, you're not staying informed. You're preventing understanding. And a mind that never completes a thought slowly forgets how meaning is made. Number 8. Never letting attention fully settle. Your attention isn't weak. It's being kept in a permanent state of hover. You're always about to focus, but never quite there. The mind circles ideas without landing on them, like a helicopter that never touches ground. This isn't restlessness by accident. It's a learned pattern. Attention today is encouraged to skim, sample, preview, and move on before depth has a chance to take hold. When attention settles, something uncomfortable happens. Commitment. Settled attention means choosing one thing and excluding everything else. It means risking boredom, confusion, or temporary frustration. Modern environments subtly frame that as a mistake. They reward responsiveness, not devotion, so your mind stays light, mobile, and shallow, ready to pivot at the slightest hint of strain. The tragedy is that depth only reveals itself after attention settles. Insight lives past the initial discomfort phase. But if you leave too early every time, your brain never learns that reward exists on the other side. It starts to believe that all experiences peak quickly and decline fast. This creates impatience not just with tasks, but with people, ideas, and even your own inner life. Over time, unsettled attention produces a constant sense of anticipation with no arrival. You're alert but unsatisfied, engaged but unfulfilled. Your mind is busy scanning for the next signal, yet nothing ever feels complete. This is why even high stimulation starts to feel flat. It's consumed without absorption. A settled mind feels slow at first. That slowness is often mistaken for inefficiency. In reality, it's the entry point to coherence. Without settling, thoughts remain fragments. Meaning remains thin. Identity itself becomes unstable, built from impressions instead of understanding. Attention that never settles doesn't protect you from discomfort. It traps you in perpetual incompletion. And a life lived without arrival quietly forgets what depth feels like. Number 7. Replacing thinking with stimulation. Thinking used to be how you processed reality. Now, it's something you skip past. The instant a problem becomes mentally demanding, stimulation rushes in to replace it. Music, videos, scrolling, background noise, something to keep the mind occupied so it doesn't have to engage. This isn't relaxation, it's substitution. Instead of working through a thought, you anesthetize it. Thinking is slow by nature. It involves uncertainty, false starts, internal resistance. Stimulation is fast. It delivers instant sensation without asking anything back. Over time, your brain learns a dangerous lesson. Effort is optional. If something feels cognitively heavy, there's always an easier input waiting to carry you away. This rewires how problems are approached. Rather than asking, "What does this mean?" or "How do I resolve this?" the mind asks, "How do I stop feeling this tension?" Stimulation answers immediately. The relief feels productive, even comforting, but nothing is actually processed. The thought remains unresolved, quietly accumulating weight in the background. As this pattern repeats, thinking itself starts to feel unpleasant, not because you're incapable, but because your tolerance has been lowered. Deep thought now competes with highly optimized stimuli designed to hijack attention effortlessly. Against that contrast, reflection feels dull, inefficient, even pointless. The long-term effect is subtle but profound. You begin to outsource meaning-making. Opinions come pre-packaged, explanations arrive ready-made. Your inner voice grows quieter, not because you found clarity, but because it's constantly interrupted before it can speak. Stimulation doesn't expand the mind. It fills the space thinking used to occupy. And a mind that stops thinking doesn't go empty. It becomes dependent. Number 6. Avoiding silence instinctively. Silence no longer feels neutral. It feels like something is wrong. The moment external noise disappears, your body reacts before your mind does. You reach for sound without thinking. Music, a podcast, a video, playing in the background. Not for enjoyment, but to fill the space. Silence now triggers a subtle alarm, as if you've been left alone with something unfinished. This instinct didn't appear randomly. Silence is where unprocessed thoughts surface. Regrets, unanswered questions, half-formed realizations. They rise when there's nothing else competing for attention. Modern habits train you to avoid that encounter. Noise becomes a shield, not against boredom, but against self-confrontation. When silence is consistently avoided, the mind loses its ability to sit with ambiguity. Any moment without input feels empty instead of fertile. But silence is not absence. It's a processing state. It's where memories integrate, emotions settle, and meaning slowly organizes itself. Removing silence is like removing sleep from the brain while insisting it should still function normally. Over time, this creates a strange tension. You're surrounded by sound, yet internally restless. The noise prevents discomfort temporarily, but it also prevents resolution. Thoughts don't dissolve, they wait. Silence would have allowed them to pass through. Noise keeps them suspended. This is why stillness now feels heavy. It's not that silence is dangerous. It's that you've accumulated too much unprocessed material to face it comfortably. Avoidance compounds the problem. Each escape makes the next moment of quiet feel even more threatening. Silence isn't the enemy of focus. It's the doorway to it. And a mind that fears silence is often protecting itself from truths it hasn't had time to understand. Number 5. Ending focus the moment it strains. The moment focus starts to ache, you stop. Not because it's harmful, but because you've learned that strain means danger. Mental strain used to be a signal of depth. It marked the boundary between surface understanding and real comprehension. Today, that signal has been reinterpreted as a warning sign. As soon as effort becomes noticeable, you disengage, switch tasks, check something, soften the edge. Relief arrives instantly, and your brain logs that escape as the correct response. This creates a powerful conditioning loop. Focus no longer stretches, it contracts. Your tolerance for cognitive effort shrinks, not gradually, but decisively. The mind never learns that strain is temporary, that clarity often arrives after resistance. Instead, it learns that discomfort should be avoided at all costs, even if it means abandoning something meaningful. The result isn't laziness, it's fragility. Any task that doesn't yield immediate ease starts to feel excessive. Reading feels tiring. Thinking feels heavy. Conversations that require attention feel draining. Not because they are inherently difficult, but because your system has been trained to expect frictionless engagement. This is how depth quietly disappears from your life. Depth demands staying when it would be easier to leave. It demands tolerating confusion long enough for structure to form. When focus is cut off at the first sign of strain, nothing complex survives long enough to make sense. Over time, you begin to mistrust effort itself. You equate ease with correctness and difficulty with failure. That belief seeps into how you judge yourself. You stop attempting things that require sustained attention, not because you can't do them, but because you've learned to quit before your capacity has a chance to grow. Strain isn't proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're close to something real. And a mind that always retreats at the edge of effort never discovers how deep it can go. Number 4. Training shallow engagement. You didn't become shallow overnight. You were trained. Quietly, repeatedly, efficiently. Shallow engagement isn't a lack of intelligence or curiosity. It's a habit formed by constant exposure to experiences that demand almost nothing from you. Short clips, skimmed headlines, half-read ideas. Each interaction asks for minimal attention and offers quick closure. Your brain adapts by learning the fastest possible way to extract stimulation and move on. Over time, depth starts to feel unnecessary. Why stay with something longer when novelty is always seconds away? The mind begins optimizing for speed instead of substance. It learns to recognize patterns quickly, form instant impressions, and abandon inquiry before complexity appears. This feels efficient, but it's actually reductive. You're engaging with surfaces, not structures. The most damaging part is subtle. Shallow engagement feels like participation. You're reacting, commenting, sharing, staying busy, but none of it requires sustained presence. You touch many things without ever holding one long enough to understand it. This creates an illusion of involvement while eroding your ability to concentrate deeply on any single thread. As this pattern strengthens, depth starts to feel disproportionate. Long-form thinking seems excessive. Careful reasoning feels slow. Anything that can't be grasped quickly is labeled boring or irrelevant, not because it lacks value, but because your engagement muscles have been trained for short bursts only. Eventually, even your own thoughts are treated this way. You skim past them. You don't follow them to their conclusion. You interrupt yourself mid-idea, conditioned to believe that staying too long is wasteful. Shallow engagement doesn't make life lighter. It makes it thinner. And a mind trained to skim the world slowly loses the ability to feel its weight and meaning. Number 3. Mistaking activity for clarity. You feel busy, not clear. And the difference matters more than you think. Activity creates motion. Clarity creates direction. But when the mind is fragmented, motion becomes a substitute for understanding. You respond, organize, plan, consume, react, constantly doing something. The movement feels productive. It feels like progress. But underneath, the core questions remain untouched. This confusion happens because activity provides immediate feedback. Each action gives a small sense of completion, a reply sent, a task checked off, a piece of information absorbed. Clarity, on the other hand, arrives slowly. It requires stillness, integration, and patience. In a system trained for speed, that feels inefficient, almost irresponsible. Over time, the mind begins to associate thinking with stagnation and doing with control. When uncertainty arises, you don't sit with it. You accelerate. More inputs, more steps, more motion. This keeps anxiety at bay, but it also keeps insight out. You're circling problems instead of entering them. This is why mental exhaustion now coexists with confusion. You've expended enormous energy, yet nothing feels resolved. Activity fragments attention further, scattering it across tasks without allowing synthesis. Without synthesis, information stays raw. You know many things, but understand very little. The cost shows up quietly. Decisions feel harder despite having more data. You second-guess yourself constantly, not because you lack intelligence, but because clarity was never allowed to form. It was always postponed in favor of staying active. Clarity doesn't come from movement. It comes from alignment. And a mind that never stops moving rarely notices it's going in circles. Number 2. Feeling restless without input. Stillness now feels like deprivation, as if something essential has been taken away. When there's no input, no screen, no sound, no stream of information, a subtle agitation appears. You shift, you fidget. Your mind searches for something to latch onto. This isn't boredom in the old sense. It's withdrawal. Your nervous system has adapted to constant stimulation, and silence registers as a lack. Restlessness without input is a learned response. The brain becomes accustomed to external signals regulating its state. When those signals stop, internal regulation feels difficult. Thoughts don't flow smoothly. They collide. Emotions surface without context. Instead of curiosity, you feel an urge to escape the moment entirely. This restlessness trains avoidance. Rather than asking what the discomfort is pointing to, you eliminate it with more input. Over time, the mind forgets how to generate its own momentum. Reflection, imagination, and spontaneous insight weaken because they require tolerance for emptiness at the start. The irony is that this constant feeding makes the mind more fragile, not more satisfied. Stimulation raises the baseline. What once felt engaging now feels insufficient. The absence of input doesn't feel peaceful. It feels intolerable. You begin to confuse presence with passivity and stillness with stagnation. This is why doing nothing feels harder than doing too much. Without input, you're confronted with raw awareness, unfinished thoughts, unresolved feelings, unanswered questions. Restlessness is the signal that your inner world has been neglected, not that it's broken. A mind that can't be still becomes dependent. A mind that's always fed forgets how to feed itself. And without that ability, depth can't survive for long. Number 1. Losing tolerance for depth. Depth didn't disappear. Your patience for it did. Depth asks something uncomfortable from you, time without payoff. It requires staying with ideas that don't reward you immediately, emotions that don't resolve cleanly, questions that resist quick answers. In a fragmented mental environment, this feels unbearable, not because depth is harder than before, but because your tolerance window has been steadily shrinking. When attention is constantly interrupted, the nervous system adapts to short cycles of reward, fast understanding, fast relief, fast closure. Anything that unfolds slowly begins to feel excessive, even threatening. Books feel too long, conversations feel too heavy. Thoughts that don't resolve quickly feel like failures rather than invitations. This is how depth becomes mislabeled as inefficiency. You start to believe that if something truly mattered, it would be instantly engaging. That belief quietly erases whole categories of meaning: wisdom, mastery, self-knowledge, because none of them arrive quickly. They require endurance through ambiguity, confusion, and moments of doubt. As tolerance for depth erodes, identity itself becomes unstable. You relate to ideas briefly, then abandon them. You touch values without embodying them. You sample perspectives without integrating them. Life becomes a sequence of impressions instead of a coherent narrative. You feel informed, stimulated, and active, yet strangely unrooted. The most tragic part is that depth doesn't demand perfection. It only asks that you stay, that you resist the urge to escape when meaning hasn't revealed itself yet. When tolerance is lost, that staying feels impossible. You leave too early every time. Depth isn't gone from the world. It's waiting beyond the point where most people quit. And regaining tolerance for it is not about attention. It's about courage.